We sold the company for $1.2 billion, and you're fired. My father didn't even blink as he slid the document across the table. The proceeds go to Brent. He has the vision. You? You're just the help, Megan. Now sign this independent contractor agreement so we can cash out, or I'll blacklist you from every lab in the country. I looked at my mother. She was checking her reflection in her spoon, refusing to meet my eyes. I looked at Brent. He was already popping a bottle of Dom Perignon, laughing at me. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just picked up the pen. They thought they were stripping me of my rights, but they were actually signing their own death warrant. Before I tell you why that signature became the most expensive mistake of their lives, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I want to see how far this story travels. I didn't flip the table or demand the fairness that had been denied to me for 29 years. I just looked at my mother. Susan was busy studying the bubbles in her champagne glass, terrified that if she made eye contact with me, she might have to acknowledge that she was stripping her own daughter of a livelihood. Did you know? I asked. My voice calm. She didn't look up. It's business, Megan. Your father and Brent, they have a strategy. You're a scientist. You don't understand the market. I looked at Brent. He was leaning back in his leather chair, feet up on the table, already texting someone about his new wealth. He had never mixed a chemical compound in his life. He thought H2O was a clothing brand. Suddenly, the anger vanished. It was replaced by a cold, clinical clarity. For years, I had asked myself why they treated me this way. Why did I have to work 18-hour days in the basement lab while Brent got the corner office? Why was my money family money? But their money was investment capital. I used to think they hated me. But in that moment, staring at their smug faces, I realized the truth. They didn't hate me. They resented me. They resented me because I was competent. My ability was a constant, blinding mirror to their own uselessness. Every time I saved the company, I reminded them that they couldn't. If I fought them now, if I sued, if I screamed, if I demanded my share, I would just be engaging in the same dynamic. I would be trying to fix them. I would be trying to save them from their own greed. But what if I didn't? I looked down at the independent contractor agreement. It was designed to hurt me. It stripped me of my title, my stock options, and my tenure. It classified me as a temporary external resource with zero equity. But it did something else. Something their high-priced lawyers obviously hadn't explained to them. It stripped me of liability. As an executive officer, a CTO, I had a fiduciary duty to disclose critical product risks to the board and potential buyers. If I knew the product was flawed and I stayed silent as an officer, I could be sued. I could go to prison. But as an independent contractor, my only duty was to fulfill the specific tasks in the contract. And this contract didn't ask me for quality control. It just asked me to leave. I thought about the formula. The Eternal Youth Cream. The product that was about to ship to 500,000 customers worldwide. I thought about the oxidation rate. Without the stabilizing serum, a serum I kept in my head. A serum I synthesized manually every 48 hours because I didn't trust them with the recipe. The cream wouldn't just spoil. It would turn into a black, sulfurous sludge within 2 days of opening. If I signed this paper, I wasn't just walking away from the money. I was walking away from the responsibility of saving them when the chemistry inevitably fought back. Well, Richard barked. We don't have all day. The buyers are waiting. Okay, I said. I uncapped the pen. I signed my name with a flourish. Megan Vance, independent contractor. I slid the paper back across the mahogany table. Done, I said. I'll pack my personal items. Security will mail them to you. Brent sneered. We don't want you stealing trade secrets. Keep the lab coat, I said, standing up. You're going to need it. I walked to the glass doors. I didn't look back at the view of the city skyline. I didn't look back at the family that had just sold me out for a wire transfer. I walked out of the boardroom, down the hall, and into the elevator. As the doors closed, cutting off the sound of their celebration, I checked my watch. The first shipment was scheduled to leave the warehouse in 6 days. The clock had started. I drove my 10-year-old sedan past the gated community where my parents lived, past the luxury dealerships where Brent bought his cars, and kept going until the streets turned narrow and the buildings turned to brick. My apartment wasn't a penthouse. It was a converted studio in a repurposed industrial park. The rent was cheap because the air still smelled faintly of diesel and old rubber. I unlocked the door and tossed the lab coat, my severance package, onto the futon. 3 years ago, I didn't live here. 3 years ago, I had a trust fund. My grandmother had left me $500,000. It was supposed to be my freedom. It was supposed to be my seed money for a quiet life away from Richard and Susan's constant demands for perfection. But then Lumina hit the wall. I remembered the dinner, not in a boardroom, but at their kitchen table. Richard had his head in his hands. The suppliers had cut them off. The bank was calling the loans. The empire was 48 hours away from bankruptcy. We just need a bridge, Richard had pleaded. Just enough to buy the raw materials for the new line. We'll pay you back with interest, Megan. You're investing in the family. I wrote the check. $500,000. Every cent I had. I didn't ask for a contract. I didn't ask for equity. I trusted them. And how did they repay that investment? They put me in the basement. While the Lumina brand was being built on sleek, minimalist packaging and high-end influencer parties, I was working 18-hour shifts in a windowless room below the warehouse floor. The ventilation was garbage. In the summer, it reached 100 degrees. I developed chemical burns on my fingers because Susan said buying safety-grade gloves was unnecessary overhead. I created Serum X down there. I stabilized the volatile compounds that made the Eternal Youth Cream actually work. I slept on a cot next to the centrifuge because if the temperature fluctuated by 2 degrees, the batch was ruined. And while I was sweating in the dark, Brent was building the brand. I remembered seeing the credit card statements one month when the accountant left them on the printer. $20,000 for a launch party in Ibiza. $6,000 for client dinners that were just Brent and his dates. $12,000 a month for a corporate apartment in the city because the commute from the suburbs stifled his creativity. When I confronted Richard about it when I asked why I was eating ramen while Brent was eating Wagyu on the company dime, he didn't even look up from his paper. Brent is the face of the company. Megan, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He needs to project success to attract investors. That's branding. Your money. That was duty. You don't get a medal for doing what's expected of a daughter. Duty. I looked around my small, dark apartment. I looked at my scarred hands. They thought my $500,000 was a gift. They thought my labor was an obligation. They thought they could take the product I built, sell it for $1 billion, and leave me with nothing but a used lab coat. But they forgot one thing. When you treat the architect like a slave, you shouldn't be surprised when she stops holding up the roof. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. I just opened the calendar app and set a notification for 6 days from now. That was the day the first shipment would land in retail stores. That was the day the chemistry would start the countdown that I was no longer being paid to stop. A week later, the wire transfer hit. $100 million. The first tranche. I watched it happen on the news from my laptop in the kitchen. Richard and Brent were standing on a podium, flanking the CEO of Omnipharm. Flashbulbs were popping. Richard looked like a king who had finally reclaimed his throne. Brent looked like a child who had just been handed the keys to a candy store. Innovation, Richard told the reporters, beaming into the camera. That is the legacy of the Vance family. We built this formula from nothing. We poured our souls into it. He didn't mention the grandmother whose money bought the first beaker. He didn't mention the daughter who spent 3 years breathing chemical fumes while he played golf. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Susan. The closing gala is tonight at the Ritz. Don't bother coming. We don't want you making the investors uncomfortable with your sullen attitude. We'll send you a check for your time eventually. Eventually. I didn't reply. I just swiped the notification away. Then, my screen flickered with a different kind of alert. It was a mass email from the Lumina internal server, one they hadn't scrubbed my personal address from yet. Subject: Urgent. Shipment update from Office of the CEO. Brent Vance. Effective immediately. We are bypassing the final QC hold. The demand is too high to wait for lab coats to tick boxes. Ship the entire stock of 500,000 units to our global retailers now. We need those shelves full by Monday. Also, to the junior chemistry staff. Your services are no longer required. We have the money now. We don't need nerds slowing us down. Security will escort you out. I stared at the screen. He was shipping the batch. The batch that had been sitting in the warehouse for 5 days. The batch that needed the stabilizer added at the 96th hour to prevent the molecular bonds from unraveling. He wasn't just skipping a safety check. He was skipping the chemistry itself. My hand instinctively reached for the phone. It was a reflex, burned into me by 29 years of conditioning. Fix it. Save them. Clean up the mess. I could call the warehouse manager. I could call the Omnipharm transition team. I could scream that they were about to ship 500,000 biological time bombs. I could save their reputation. I could save them from the lawsuit that would inevitably follow. My thumb hovered over the call button, and then I stopped. For my entire life, I had been the safety net. When Brent failed math, I did his homework. When Richard overspent on marketing, I covered the payroll. I had convinced myself that this was love. I thought that if I saved them enough times eventually, they would value the savior. But they didn't. They just resented the fact that they needed saving. If I called now, if I rushed in one last time to stop the shipment, nothing would change. Richard would claim he caught the error. Brent would say I was overreacting. Susan would tell me I was trying to steal the spotlight. They would take the safety I provided, cash the check, and leave me in the cold again. Warning them wasn't an act of love, it was an act of enabling. It was giving them permission to continue being incompetent and cruel. I realized then that the most powerful thing I could do wasn't to fight, or to scream, or to sue. It was to do exactly what they asked. They asked me to leave. They asked me to stop being the help. So I put the phone down. I watched the digital status on the inventory tracker flip from hold to shipped. Silence wasn't passive. Silence was a weapon. And I had just pulled the trigger. 48 hours. That's how long it took for the science to catch up with the greed. I was sitting in my new home office, a desk in the corner of my living room, far from the basement lab, when the first notification popped up on my laptop. It was an Instagram tag. A major beauty influencer with 3 million followers had posted an unboxing video of the Eternal Youth Cream. I clicked play. Okay guys, I was so excited for this, she said, holding up the sleek, gold-embossed jar. It costs $500, so I'm expecting miracles. She twisted the cap open. She gasped. It wasn't a theatrical gasp. It was genuine shock. She tilted the jar toward the camera. Instead of the pearlescent white cream that had been advertised, the jar was filled with a thick, dark brown sludge. It looked like motor oil mixed with mud. Ew, she whispered, bringing it closer to her nose. Then she recoiled, gagging. Oh my God. It smells like rotten eggs. Like sulfur. She dropped the jar on her vanity table. Lumina? What is this? Is this a joke? I refreshed the page. The comments were already flooding in. Mine looks like that too. I just opened mine and it smells like a sewer. Is it supposed to be brown? The website shows white cream. I opened Twitter. All number Lumina scam was already trending. People were posting photos of their jars. Some were brown. Some were black. Some had separated into a clear, oily liquid and a hard, gritty solid. The chemical reaction was called rapid oxidation. Without Serum X to stabilize the active peptides, the formula reacted with the oxygen in the air the moment the factory seal was broken. The sulfur bonds broke down, releasing hydrogen sulfide gas, hence the smell, and the cream's base structure collapsed into its raw components. It was ugly. It was smelly. And it was irreversible. My phone rang. It wasn't Richard. It was Mr. Thomas. You're seeing this? He asked. His voice was calm, professional. I am, I said. The stock price for Omnipharm just dropped 12% in pre-market trading, Thomas said. They're halting sales. They're issuing a global recall. I watched the chaos unfold on my screen. A news anchor was talking about a luxury beauty disaster. A dermatologist was warning people not to put the spoiled product on their skin because the pH levels could cause irritation. I felt a strange detachment. I wasn't happy. I wasn't sad. I was just validated. Megan, Thomas said. They're going to come for you. They're going to say you built a kill switch. I didn't, I said, my voice steady. I built a car engine. They decided to drive it without oil. I know, Thomas said. But they don't. And neither does Omnipharm. Get your files ready. We're going to need that contract. It's already scanned, I said. Good. Stay home. Don't answer the door. Let them panic. I hung up. I looked at the jar of Serum X sitting on my desk. Just a small vial of clear liquid. I had synthesized it myself. Right here in my kitchen. Just to prove I still could. 1 drop. That's all it would have taken per batch. 1 drop to keep the cream white, stable, and effective. 1 drop to save $1 billion deal. But I wasn't an employee anymore. I was an independent contractor. And my contract didn't say anything about saving them from themselves. You didn't build a kill switch, I whispered to the empty room, repeating Thomas's words. You just refused to be the battery. I closed my laptop just as the news hit. Omnipharm was suing Lumina's board for $200 million fraud, breach of contract, negligence. 15 minutes later, Susan called begging me to return, sign exit papers, and separate from liability. I knew it was a setup. But I went anyway, carrying only the independent contractor agreement I had signed 6 days earlier. The warehouse lot was filled with police cars. Inside, Susan paced, Richard sweated, and Brent pointed dramatically at the door the moment he saw me, screaming that I had sabotaged the product. Officers searched my bag, found a planted vial of chemical agent, and cuffed me in front of the press. Richard and Brent gave tearful statements painting me as a jealous saboteur, willing to destroy the family business. An hour later, the door opened. Mr. Thomas, my attorney, arrived. He revealed the truth. By forcing me into contractor status to steal my stock, they'd stripped me of liability. Clause 14 confirmed I had zero duty to protect the product or guarantee it. Richard and Brent alone had signed the purchase guarantees To Omnifarm. Their attempt to frame me legally boomeranged Omnifarm, and prosecutors moved to seize their assets. I walked free. 3 weeks later, I sold my formula never written down to Omnifarm for $50 million and launched my own medical research venture. Meanwhile, Richard and Brent lost everything. House, cars, trust funds, and their reputations. I saw them once more outside bankruptcy court, broken, blaming each other, waiting for a bus. I left them behind, deleted the family group chat, and finally reclaimed my life in silence.